Every empire claims to be built on a foundation of truth, but many of these truths turn out to be lies that grow beyond control. The Imperium of Man is no different. In this video I want to talk about the Ecclesiarchy, the Church of the Imperium of Man, its origins, how it interacts with the rest of the imperial state, and how it works in the current setting. As always, I will compare it to as many real-world examples as I can. Hopefully, by understanding the lore a little better, we can also get a better understanding of the world that we live in too. As per usual, I want to be respectful of your time, so there are timestamps below if you need them. But make sure to relax, maybe grab a snack or a drink, and most importantly, enjoy. In the earliest days of the Imperium, even before the Emperor had fully unified the homeworld of humanity, Terra, he had developed an underlying philosophy to guide his new project, the Imperial Truth. This was the atheistic belief that things like religion, faith, and superstition were plagues upon mankind. The Emperor declared it his duty to remove these things wherever they were. His earliest armies of genetically engineered soldiers, the Thunder Warriors, destroyed all the churches, temples, and religious sites that they came across. By the time the Great Crusade reached the stars, there were no longer any churches on Terra. But this philosophy of the Imperial Truth wasn't just about eliminating the existence of faith. It had things to replace it with. Science, logic, and reason were supposed to be the lenses through which mankind was now to see the universe and their place within it. Beneath this rational surface, however, there was still dogma. Things like the danger posed by the mere existence of aliens or Xenos. The exceptionalism of humanity was paramount. So too was the idea that it was the manifest destiny of mankind to spread out across the galaxy and rule the stars. These elements of the Imperial Truth show us that there was only ever a veneer of rationalism on the philosophy of this new Imperium. Irrationality and belief without evidence were still fundamental to the new way of understanding reality that the Emperor was forcing on the galaxy. When looking at the Imperial Truth, we need to look at the concept of manifest destiny, a 19th century imperial ideal from the United States. It said that God wanted the US to expand westward. This is a term that has its origins in the Christian Bible. Matthew 5:14 states that, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden." The term city upon a hill is an expression that has been used by American leaders from the times of Puritan settlers right up to the likes of JFK and Ronald Reagan. A city upon a hill should be a model for others, an influence and example that the rest of the world should follow. Resulting from this thinking and other sources over generations, the idea that the society of the United States should be dominant, well, it seemed natural. If any other nation claimed the land in North America, or if anyone else lived in the path of these new settlers, it didn't matter. The term was popularized by the journalist and later pro-Confederacy propagandist John O'Sullivan. Manifest destiny wasn't a single codified belief, but a part of its origin was in the dominance of the American, Anglo-Saxon, and Protestant race over others. In America, divine purpose was wrapped in the language of progress and science, just like the Emperor wrapped faith in the language of reason. This belief helped justify the expansion of the American experiment, especially at the expense of whatever else was there. The Imperium used their version of manifest destiny to show the superiority of the Emperor's version of humanity over Xenos and the other forms of mankind that had developed independently of his supposedly manifestly superior vision. Humanity previously had an interstellar empire, but it collapsed. While there are plenty of Xenos that probably should be eliminated, there are plenty that can be negotiated with or even beneficial to the Imperium. There is evidence that at least some of these imperial ideologies were wrong. But in this setting, belief doesn't just reflect the reality for people, it shapes it. The more people pray and believe, the stronger their gods become. The Emperor wasn't just waging a war on the galaxy, but on human emotion itself. One of the reasons for the Imperial Truth and its creation was never publicly stated by the Emperor. He wanted to reduce the power of the Chaos Gods of the Warp. These are beings that exist on a separate plane of existence to our material universe and feed from the emotions of thinking beings. The Chaos Gods are extremely powerful and are often made even more so through direct worship. Religious faith, at least according to the Emperor, can be easily manipulated by these gods to fuel their own power. So, by eliminating worship, the Emperor will eliminate many possible avenues of sustenance for these gods. Make no mistake, the Chaos Gods are evil. Worshipping them will often lead to eternal damnation of your soul. And it's also worth mentioning here, unlike in the real world, people in the Imperium actually have tangible physical proof that souls exist and can suffer after death. But more on that later. Various religious faiths had indeed been taken advantage of and manipulated by these gods for their own ends. But the Emperor failed in this aspect of his project. He was never able to make rationality a dominant force in this new Imperium. He tried to force it to replace faith as opposed to creating it for its own sake. Belief was never shaken loose. One of the 20 sons of the Emperor, the Primarch Lorgar, was the embodiment of this failure. He was founded the world of Cultus, which was dominated by various cults and religious orders. There is evidence that at least some of these faiths were manipulated by the gods of chaos. But Lorgar worshipped the Emperor, at least at first. Due to the nature of the early Imperium, he rarely made these beliefs public and was often forced to worship in secret. Over the course of the Great Crusade, Lorgar secretly spread a version of this early emperor worship across the worlds that his legion, the Word Bearers, conquered. He even created this faith's central text, the Lectitio Divinitatis. In trying to destroy this cult, the emperor wound up creating some of its first prophets. The early cult of the emperor operated in the shadows, away from view. Religion was outlawed in the Imperium after all. Lorgar and his legion were censured for their beliefs. Their holy, perfect city of Monarchia was destroyed by the Ultramarines Legion of Space Marines and their Primarch Rebute Guilliman. Lorgar would soon find out about the Chaos Gods, and he decided that these were beings that not only deserved his worship, but demanded it. This apostasy would become one of the instigating factors of the later Horus Heresy and the millennia of decline in the Imperium. Some of the other early imperial cults included the Confederation of Light, who worshipped through acts of poverty and charity, though the Temple of the Saviour Emperor would later become dominant. This history is reminiscent of the early history of the Christian Church. It was outlawed for years in the Roman Empire, and its members had to worship in secret. There were also various different cults and sects, many of which would later form the Roman Catholic Church by the early medieval period. During the heresy and the Siege of Terra, many of these cults wound up helping the imperial cause. As such, many of the restrictions on it started to slack. Over time, this faith became not only accepted, but a fundamental part of daily life for most in the Imperium. Some of the earliest saints and preachers of this new church were the former iterators of the Great Crusade. These were the artists, philosophers, and preachers of the imperial truth. Many of them, like Sinderman and Keeler, would end up changing their beliefs due to some of the things that they witnessed in the Crusade and early heresy. In the Siege of Terra novels, we see many of the regular citizens of the Imperium turn towards these new imperial cults for safety, comfort, and community. There are plenty of stories of these early saints rallying all manner of forces, from the great and the good, including Highlords and Space Marine captains like Sigismund, to everyday citizenry. Countless people and their souls were saved due to this faith in the Emperor. One of these early religious leaders became known as Fetidicus. Fetidicus? I can't pronounce that, I'm very sorry. We aren't sure who this character is in the novels or their real name. They were mentioned in very old lore from the 1990s. The name comes from the Latin word for of or relating to prophecy. This figure became the first leader or Ecclesiarch of the Temple of the Saviour Emperor. A former Imperial Army veteran of the siege of the Imperial Palace, he was able to lend authority and clout to this new cult. By the time of his death at the age of 120, in the years after the Horus Heresy, the cult had over 1 billion members on Terra alone and was spanning outwards across the Imperium. Even though the Emperor explicitly founded his Imperium on a philosophy of atheism, though not necessarily secularism, this worship spread across his domain. This spread gained speed after his ascension to the Golden Throne. By the 32nd millennium, this cult had subsumed most of the smaller ones and became the official state religion of the Imperium of Man. A few hundred years after the acceptance of the Church, the Ecclesiarch Veneris II became the first holder of that office to be granted a seat on the Highlords of Terra, the highest governing body of the Imperium. A few hundred years after that, the Ecclesiarch seat became a permanent fixture on that body, one of only 9 permanent seats out of 12 total. Around this time, the cult also changed. It stopped being a cult and became the Ecclesiarchy, or the Adeptus Ministorum. It was now the official state religion and a branch of the imperial government. The Ecclesiarch became one of the most powerful individuals in the entire galaxy. In the real world, this is a term in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and is used to describe an official who is responsible for the care of a church and its properties. In Western European traditions, this role is often filled by someone called a sacristan. I think that this naming convention is important. Firstly, because I find it hard to say. There are older videos on this channel when I get the pronunciation completely wrong. I apologise and I'll always try to do better. I appreciate the helpful comments, lads. The other thing to note though is that this is an office that has its origins in the doorkeepers of holy sites of Abrahamic faiths. These individuals would control who was allowed to enter sacred places. They would later be given authority over the treasures and physical possessions of a given religious site, things like holy vestments, relics, etc. In the Catholic tradition, the leader of the church, the Pope, can trace their theological heritage to St. Peter, the first apostle and follower of Christ, or the Apostle Andrew in the Orthodox tradition. In the Imperium, the focus of this faith is on the physical wealth and objects that the church possesses. This is an important distinction to make and a criticism of the church by some very important characters in the setting itself. The custodian Valerian in the Vaults of Terra series by Chris Raitt explicitly criticises the church for spending so much money on physical cathedrals and not for the good of the people. It is a common theme in the lore, especially for high-ranking members of the church, to live in luxury at the explicit expense of the masses. This would later lead to calamity. The notions of sacrifice, poverty, and humility are pretty prevalent in Christianity. Jesus died on the cross for the sins of the world. He was a tradesperson, lived in poverty. He seemed like a nice guy. By the time of the Renaissance in Europe, however, these ideas seem to have become separate from many of the practices of the Roman Catholic Church. The original Basilica of St. Peter in Rome was destroyed by an earthquake and was subsequently replaced by a much grander structure. Many of the Christians in Europe gave to the church in an effort to alleviate their sins. The common story is that by the 1500s or thereabouts, plenty of members of the clergy would live in luxury and excess, while many of the people didn't. Sacrifice, generosity, and humility were sentiments people should have for the church, and not the other way around. Eventually, this helped lead to the Protestant Reformation in Europe and generations of sectarian conflict, destruction, and death, all supposedly in the name of God. This same conflict is echoed in the lore of the Imperium during the Age of Apostasy. For millennia, there had been a rivalry at the heart of imperial government over who was really in charge. Indeed, this conflict is still ongoing in the current lore. The Adeptus Administratum is really at the heart of imperial power, and their reach is far and wide. I have a full video on them linked down below. The Ecclesiarchy was prideful, and the majority of imperial citizens believed that they spoke the words of the emperor himself. Though this wasn't the case, this is something that the Ecclesiarchy never really countered publicly. There were other powerful organizations in the Imperium that never worshipped the emperor as a god, the Mechanicus and most of the Space Marines, for example. As a result, in the 35th millennium, the Ecclesiarchy moved from Terra to the world of Ophelia 7. This was one of the wealthiest in the whole of the Imperium at the time. It was said that the ecclesiarchal palaces there covered over 90,000 square miles and stretched 4,000 miles into the sky, though that may have been an exaggeration, even in the lore. The Ecclesiarchy was based here for about 300 years before it finally returned to Terra. In that time, it amassed commercial fleets and trade routes, it built monuments and cathedrals all over the galaxy, and it also created fleets of warships and armies called the Frateris Templars, all of which rivaled the Imperial Guard navy in strength. But to pay for all of this, they needed to raise tithes. Speaking of which, if you are enjoying this free content and want to support the channel, please make sure to check out the Patreon link in the description to join our community. Every little bit helps keep these history meets lore deep dives coming. I'm also going to be adding things like access to a Discord server, voting on future video topics, and script access very soon. But while my tithes are entirely optional, in the Ecclesiarchy, they most definitely were not. Enter Goge Vandire. This is considered to be one of the most tumultuous periods of imperial history. There was much civil strife as populations and even planetary governors protested, sometimes violently, against these new tithes. But the Ecclesiarchy's palaces and monuments went up, ever more elaborate. During this period too, warp storms broke out all across the galaxy, cutting off entire regions of space. In this confusion, new cults arose, not under the control of the Ecclesiarchy or Terra. It was in this context that Vandire became the High Lord of the Administratum, the most powerful organization in the imperial government. He rose through the ranks through malicious tactics. Those who accused him of murder would often go missing or be found dead. He was able to use his power to manipulate the Ecclesiarchy and eventually became the leader of both organizations, during what became known as his Reign of Blood. He was already the most powerful person in the imperial government, but now he was unchecked. It quickly became apparent that he was a tyrant, a madman and insane. He would go from laughing to murderous in an instant, and countless millions would die due to his whims. When warp storms would subside and worlds would become accessible again, he wasted no time in regaining control over both the world and the faith of its inhabitants. One such world was the agri-world of San-Dior, on which there was a small cult, no more than 500 members strong, an all-female organisation that called themselves the Daughters of the Emperor. They devoted themselves to the Emperor's service through purity and studied the arts of war diligently for their entire lives. Van Dyer was able to manipulate them into his service. As a paranoid man, he decided that this group were to be his personal bodyguard. They were equipped with some of the best war gear in the Imperium and given functionally unlimited resources. This story, Van Dyer, and the whole age of apostasy really do deserve a video of their own. But suffice to say, this period of Imperial history would soon end. The cult of the Confederation of Light was never truly extinguished. Their leader around this time was a preacher called Sebastian Thor. He managed to rally countless Imperial communities to his cause. He preached that Van Dyer and the current Ecclesiarchy was corrupt and needed to be overthrown. The most important allies that Thor was able to get to his side were chapters of Space Marines. Though largely not adherents to the Imperial cult, they saw the corruption of Van Dyer as an evil to be extinguished. Eventually this came to a head on Terra itself. The leader of the Daughters of the Emperor, Alicia Dominica, was brought by the Custodes to the Emperor himself. What happened in the throne room remains unknown. But this awakened the Daughters to the evils of Van Dyer. She marched into his audience chambers and beheaded the tyrant. In the aftermath of this struggle, the new Ecclesiarch, Thor, proclaimed the decree passive. This forbade the Ecclesiarchy from having any men under arms. His organisation was also forever separated from the administratum. This decree was taken literally. All of the various formations of Fraterus militia were disbanded, and the Brides of the Emperor became the standing army of the newly reformed Ecclesiarchy. They were renamed to the Adepta Sororitas, or the Sisters of Battle. Games Workshop very cleverly wrote this in as their way of making an all-female army. In the current setting, they base themselves all around the Imperium. Their orders militant are based out of convents, from which they help to prosecute the Ecclesiarchy's wars of faith. They are heavily associated with the Inquisition and often fight alongside the Ordo Hereticus. In the real world, the closest analogue would be to the knightly Christian orders of the medieval period, though in the 41st millennium the gender roles are reversed. While the Space Marines are genetically engineered super soldier special forces for the Imperium, they largely still adhere to many of the original tenets of the Imperial truth from the days before the rise of the Imperial cult, though there are notable exceptions like the Black Templars. The Sororitas are some of the best trained, organised and equipped non-augmented fighting forces that are available to the Imperium. But they do far more than just fight for the Emperor, they also serve his subjects. There are non-militant branches of the Sororitas that offer many of the most reliable social services to be found across the Imperium. The Orders Hospitator are medics and surgeons, the Orders Dialogus are translators, and the Orders Sabine accompany missionaries across the galaxy. There are suborders within each of these suborders, and far more besides. Far too many to mention in just this video. If there is a need for a basic service to be provided or a charity to be given to the people of the Imperium, then the best option will likely be a local Sororitas convent. Some of them offer services as straightforward as cleaning the stained glass on Ecclesiarchy buildings, while others will be key advisors and bodyguards to certain noble families throughout Imperial space. In the real world, the clear comparison here is to the various orders of nuns in the Catholic tradition. Many of these convents offered basic social services that could not be found anywhere else. Here in Ireland, you were all waiting for an Irish reference, I know it. Make sure to like, share and subscribe. One of the many different reasons why the Catholic Church held so much clout in the society for so long was the charitable works done by various religious orders like these. In the 19th century, most of the wealth was exported from Ireland, and it took much of the time since independence to regain it. For much of that period, there would have been little in the way of things like healthcare or education for the majority of the Irish people. Various religious organisations stepped in and provided those things for free when no one else could. The Sisters of Mercy, for example, were an order of nuns based out of Ireland that provided more healthcare services to British soldiers during the Crimean War than almost anyone else, including the famous Florence Nightingale. Though in more recent generations, the quality of discipline that they offered in schools led to them being known as the Sisters of No Mercy by many of their former students. This poor reputation is one of the leading causes of the decline in church attendance here in Ireland. The same secularisation that's been seen in many other countries is here absolutely, but there's a little more going on. I mentioned this same thing in my previous video on the Imperial government, link below. Today, about 70% of the population still officially identify as Catholic, but fewer than 30% of these people will attend Mass every week. but attendance was above 90% among the Catholic population, which was over 90% of the total population as recently as 50 years ago. The Church was given a special position in Irish society in our constitution. Members of religious orders had a huge amount of power in the country, from the highest levels of government right down in nearly every local community. Tragically for everyone involved, there was rampant clerical abuse at what seemed like every level that these organisations operated at. When these scandals became public knowledge, there was a big move away from the Church. It's something that we're still coming to terms with about a generation later. I'm not here to downplay a lot of the good and charitable deeds that these religious organisations have done, but these negative experiences of a functionally theocratic state need to be mentioned whenever this topic comes up. In my grandparents' generation, however, this organisation was almost universally respected by almost all in our society. Not just for societal reasons, but because there was a genuine belief that the Catholic Church was the best organisation to care for your immortal soul. I think that Irish people still have a strong sense of morality and spirituality in our culture, even when compared to other European countries. But this part of our culture is no longer tied to one organisation. This is the big change that we're still coming to terms with. In the Imperium, however, as previously mentioned, it seems like common knowledge, at least among many characters, that the Ecclesiarchy is corrupt. No matter how many scandals arise from it, no matter how many times the Ecclesiarch is involved in a coup, they're still around. This is because the warp exists in Warhammer 40k. This alternate dimension is the ultimate destination for the souls of most beings upon death. As mentioned before, this is a hellish reality, and going here after death represents a terrible fate. But by worshipping the Emperor through the Ecclesiarchy, Imperial citizens might just be able to stave it off and remain at the Emperor's side for eternity. Though this is far from a guarantee, it's a gamble worth taking for countless billions. But who runs this massive religious organisation? The Ecclesiarchy, like most Imperial organisations, is a Byzantine and highly rigid organisation, with many ranks, countless members, and plenty of exceptions to its seemingly infinite set of rules. The bulk of this organisation is its priesthood. There are countless Ministorum priests across the world's space habitats and starships of the Imperium. Many of them will fight alongside the armies and navies of the Emperor. Preacher is the rank given to those that preach the good, righteous word of the Imperial Creed to the common citizens. They will manage to do this on the numberless worlds with vastly differing cultures, climates, languages, and other differences too numerous to mention. Preachers will lead a shrine at the centre of a parish, which is but one of an overarching diocese. Successful preachers become pontifexes with authority over numerous parishes. In some cases, these individuals will have responsibilities over multiple shrine worlds. Confessors are preachers who have excellent oratorical skills. They are free to travel around an entire diocese and preach. The next rank that's mentioned are deacons. They seem to function more in a caretaker role, in charge of the administrative duties of a local diocese. Above them are cardinals. They seem to offer a role that is a combination of a bishop and a cardinal in the Catholic Church. They are in charge of a diocese, some rank higher than others, and they form a group called the Holy Synod. This is the body that elects the next Ecclesiarch. Of course, the Ecclesiarch is the head of the Ecclesiarchy, also called the Adeptus Ministorum, Cult Imperialis, and many more names besides. They are the ultimate keeper of the state religion of the Imperium, the Creed Imperialis. For thousands of years, the Ecclesiarch has had a permanent seat on the Council of Highlords of Terra. They are one of the most powerful people in the whole of the Imperium. Sebastian Thor became the Ecclesiarch after the execution of Goj van Dyer. In many ways, he was written to be 40k's equivalent of Martin Luther. He advocated for the Ecclesiarchy to have less power than before. As such, this organisation has never seemed to go back to its peak around the time it moved to Ophelia 7. In the aftermath of the return of the Primarch Rebute Guilliman, the Ecclesiarch Baldos List sided with the traitorous Hexarchy. This was the attempted coup against the Emperor's son, led by the former head of the Administratum, Urthu Hematalian. Both individuals were regarded as reactionary and conservative, even for the Imperium. As such, any change was seen as heretical. Even though the Imperium had been torn in half and a Primarch had returned to tell them they were wrong, they still didn't change their minds. And some people say there's no satire in 40k. The current Ecclesiarch is a woman called Eos Ritera. She was appointed by Guilliman in the aftermath of the failed coup. She is seen as a reformer in this new era Indomitus that the Imperium currently finds itself in. Another High Lord that's also technically a part of the Ministorum is the current leader of the Sororitas, or Abbess of the Adeptus Sororitas, Morin Val, appointed with Guilliman's backing. She was originally a Celestin in the militant order the Argent Shroud. She was appointed to a political role by Slist, I think. He believed that due to her political inexperience, she would be easy to control. This hasn't been the case, however, and unlike almost any holder of her office before her, or any other High Lord for that matter, she continues to lead armies on the battlefield. She has led armies consisting of many different Imperial forces, though mostly sororitas, in wars of faith. These are the wars that are declared by the Ecclesiarchy against rival Imperial cults, heretics, the forces of chaos, and anyone else who threatens worship of the Emperor and the immortal souls of his subjects. The Great Crusade marked the beginning of the Emperor's project to reclaim the galaxy for humanity. But this was done not in the name of religion, but at least in part to get rid of religion. Since his ascension to the Golden Throne, however, the Ecclesiarchy has declared countless crusades against the foes of their god Emperor. These are usually done with the agreement of other High Lords and often include forces like the Mechanicus and Space Marines. Regardless of the faith of the Crusaders in question, the religious symbolism is obvious. The Imperium of Man has always launched these wars of faith. In our world, true wars of faith seem to be quite rare. In Ireland, for example, there were plenty of conflicts fought between people who considered themselves Catholic and those who considered themselves Protestant. One of the most brutal of these conflicts took place in the late 1700s. The Catholic King James II of England was deposed by the Protestant English Parliament and replaced by William III from the Dutch House of Orange. While King Billy won this conflict against his Catholic rival, he was actually helped by none other than the Pope himself. These wars, seemingly over faith, were often fought over politics and who owned the land. Religion was an excuse. That's not to say that many of those who fought in these wars of faith were never true believers, but reality is rarely so straightforward. The Ecclesiarchy was never meant to exist. The Emperor set out to build a human empire without religion, temples and superstition, but 10,000 years after he was confined to the Golden Throne, the church that worships him as a god is one of the most powerful institutions in his Imperium. The Imperial cult, the Ministorum, does everything that a real religion does. It gives people hope, a language for expressing grief, and can genuinely make their existence, even just their perception of it, better. The Ministorum has provided schools, guarded pilgrims, and healed the sick. But at the same time, it has also hoarded wealth, started wars, and created tyrants. Those in the Imperium who still cling to the ancient ways of the Imperial truth tolerate the Church, not just because it's a useful way of providing for the people, but because they have proof that hell is real. In their world, the warp exists. They know that their souls exist and can either fuel the Emperor or the demonic gods of chaos. If you are an average Imperial citizen, betting your eternal existence to the Emperor isn't a gamble. It isn't just piety like we would know it. It's insurance. That's the irony of it all. The Emperor tried to strip superstition out of the galaxy, but he never managed to properly replace faith with reason. The Ecclesiarchy was able to fill the gap that he created. Now, his Imperium probably couldn't run without it. This isn't to say that people have an inescapable need for belief in something. There are plenty of examples in the lore of people who did and still follow his atheistic imperial truth. But like in our own world, we often cannot separate the struggles, the government, and the stories of the people of the Imperium from the myths and beliefs that grow around them. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into how the Ecclesiarchy works. If you want more of this kind of thing, please check out other videos in this channel, some of which should be coming up on your screen now. Also, please make sure to like, comment and subscribe. It all really does help this channel grow and reach more people. But for now, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.